Committee. It is Tuesday, November 28th, and I thank you for understanding. Our council meeting ran late, so we made the announcement that our meeting will start at 1:30, and we are in City Hall, room 1010. We do not yet have a quorum. The council president's on his way up. He's in the elevator. But I would like to remind everyone who wants to speak on any of the items today, please fill out a comment card and bring it up to the front to the city clerk. And I'm going to take general public comment at this time. And I have Ida signed up for a general comment and item number 3. If we could give her 2 minutes. Come on up, Ida. So a minute for item, well actually just a minute for public comment. I'll call you up, but that's your item.
Thank you very much. I am the chair of the Aging Parks and Health of the Echo Park Neighborhood Council. However, I am here speaking as a senior advocate and Echo Park community activist. We were made aware, the committee, that the homeless committee had wanted our parks and libraries to open their doors to the homeless for use as toilets and places of shower, because it was essential that the homeless have these amenities. And while I think the community is supportive of the needs of the homeless, foisting on this added responsibility on our parks
I'll finish your thought, Ida.
Is absolutely not possible, because the parks and libraries do not even have adequate funding for maintenance, and City Council should look into it.
Thank you.
Health is at the bottom line. Thank you.
Wait, Ida, do you want to speak? I'll give you the choice. You want to speak on item 3 now, or you want to wait till the presentation?
I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that is it for public comment. If I can move to item number 1, I know it is a report, so why don't we get that started? Mr. CLA, can you read in item number 1, please?
Sure. Item number 1 is a motion, Blumenfield Rue, relative to updating the 2000 Americans with Disability Act self-evaluation and transition plan for city departments and related matters.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Stephen Simon, Director of the Department of Disability, here with the presentation. If you'd like to get started.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Joining me is Jeffrey Straneri, who's our acting ADA compliance officer, and sort of my lead accessibility guy in the department these days. The motion before you has 5 components to it. As I think you know in particular quite well, Council Member, that the Department of Disability has been sort of rebuilding the last few years and revisiting how we work with other city departments to really make a deep dive and make sure that all city programs, services, and facilities are fully accessible. Part of that is, of course, the ADA transition plan. The way that works is city departments do a self-evaluation. They literally look for the gaps. They're supposed to find the places where they're not accessible. We love that transparency. And then we take those gaps, if you will, and we write up a plan. And sometimes it's just a prioritization plan, sometimes it's a multi-year plan, but it's to address all of those barriers. It's to address those gaps in accessibility. So the city, and this is a federal mandate, it's done under the ADA, Department of Justice, requires this to occur. The last time the city did a full plan was in the year 2000. While at least sporadically that plan gets updated, we thought it was very important to make sure that we again do that deep dive, literally every single city department, and so on. So the first, therefore, if you will, in this motion addresses city departments to look at the 2000 transition plan. Jeffrey will be providing that plan to each department if they don't have the old copy of it. We'll be providing templates for them to do their self-evaluation and guidance on how they should go about reviewing that plan and updating it. That's the bread and butter of this, but it's attached to 4 other items here that are extraordinarily important. The Department on Disability would then report back to council twice yearly to make sure we're really truly updated on the action steps it takes to make the city fully accessible, and again, particularly in light of 2028 coming up. Third item on there talks about trainings. There are a lot of digital city trainings that city employees take, and we want to really ensure by working with ITA and the Department of Personnel that all of those trainings are accessible under Title I of the ADA for city employees. Another component of that, similar to the last one, is there's a training on ADA compliance. It's Title II compliance. It's the rights and responsibilities that local governments have. To be honest, when I came back to the city about 4 years ago to work with the Department of Disability, we were all under the impression that this was a mandatory training. And we would tell departments that, and every now and then they would push back and say, I don't think this is mandatory. And we would cite an executive order by Mayor Villaraigosa that actually, as it turns out, just mandated that general managers and AGMs took the training and sort of trickled it down. So this motion actually says this needs to be one of the few mandatory trainings that all city employees take. Something we strongly support, but we were hesitant to put together because my staff couldn't possibly train 30,000+ employees. So we've created a digital training, so some employees that need that more intense hands-on will get the personal training by my staff, and others can take the digital one. And we've ensured that that training is fully accessible. And then finally, and this is sort of an open-ended piece. It's a report back from the CAO in 90 days that we would partner with them on. Look, you're going to write a plan. The last plan was 600 pages. We're going to be writing a plan on a much deeper dive, quite frankly, than we did then. We're going to come up with literally strategies and very specific tactics for how we're going to make this city the most accessible big city in this country. And to be honest with you, we don't have a centralized mechanism to prioritize the decisions that are made under that plan and to fund the decisions that are made under that plan. So this motion asks CAO to report back on some kind of mechanism to do that. I'll actually correct myself. There is a mechanism that exists. It's a very small one. There's a fund in, I had to look it up, so it's on my sheet here. It's a fund in General Services Construction Forces Division. It's actually got $121,000 in it, which is really high because we underutilize it. Because to be honest with you, it's so little money, we can only kind of pick a pet project and do that. But when you need an elevator at Van Nuys police station because people need access to it, that sucks up the entire amount of money. When we need to redo parts of the mall next to City Hall East, every single project we come up with, would sort of exhaust a lot of the funding. So we're very excited to contemplate creating a really centralized mechanism to make real all the changes and improvements that will be recommended. That's my quickest version I can give you, but I'm certainly, we're here to answer any questions. If I may add actually one piece. So some departments are just rolling right ahead with this. I'll tell you, Rec and Parks I know is in the room. They're one of the departments that's really been looking at their transition plan regularly and updating it. I believe LAWA is in the room. LAWA has been partnering with us very closely because they're on such a massive scale, and their ability to go really high tech with accessibility is, I think, one of the shining stars of the city, and we're going to expand on that. So we're just proud to partner with them, but we will work with every single city department to make this a reality.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the work your department is doing, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that you're trying to scale up as well as retain capacity as well as training within your own department so you could do your job, and especially when it comes to the sidewalk program. I think your department was the most popular department with all the, now there's a 2-year backlog. You did your job so well. There's a 2-year backlog of ADA accessible sidewalk repairs in the queue. So I'm really acknowledging of that, and based on this motion, regarding budget request. So have you guys actually mapped out, or what kind of budget request will be needed for all the departments to ensure compliance with the 2088 self-evaluation and transition plan?
So our most immediate goal was to come up with a sort of an infrastructure and cost that out in a budget for how literally our department could take people with expertise like Jeffrey has and expand that expertise and really physically be in the spaces of all these departments. So yes, our budget has has contemplated two things: literally hiring a single additional person at Jeffrey. That's the guy with the measuring tape, right? Can literally go into the bathroom, knows the standards and so on, and can make sure we have accessible spaces and the ramps and so on. But because the city would probably need to hire 20 people like that, and honestly, I think that's cost prohibitive for the arc of the 2 to 3 years max we want to do this deep dive, right? We want to create a contract pool of certified access specialists. We have put that in our budget request, and we have noted a source of making that budget neutral to the general fund. The short story on that is there are funds that the city is currently collecting and just began collecting this year under State Bill 1180, SB 1186, and Assembly Bill 1379. These were bills that mandated the city collect a $1 fee from every business license request, and that money be used exclusively for accessibility. Initially, the city had sent a letter of inquiry to the state about how to properly enforce it in LA. There had been about a 2-year delay in enforcing it, but the Department of Finance began collecting those funds, has those funds in hand right now.
When did they start?
They did it this calendar year, but they collected the 2 years back retroactively.
Oh, great.
That funds enough to do literally everything we asked for in this
What's
year's
in the fund?
budget.
How much is in the fund, roughly?
It's approximately $600,000. It's a little bit above that. Again, it was 3 years worth of funding. So the simple math would be, well, it's about $200,000 a year. Well, this January 1st kicks in the second law I mentioned, AB 1379, which takes away the sunset from the first bill. It was going to end next year, extends it indefinitely, and makes it a $4 fee for the next 3 years, I believe. That said, the amount, and one additional piece. So the city would keep 90% of that $4, and the other 10% goes back to the state. When it drops back down to $1, 3 years from now, the city will keep 70% of those funds, and 30% will go to the state. So the Department of Finance is starting to project the funding for that, and that's more than enough for us to cover what we believe is the staffing. And again, this contract pool of folks we can come in exactly how we do our sign language interpreting, for example, with a pool of experts that can come in on Jeffrey's request and my request and work not only with city departments but also with small businesses. It's
So
also
bottom
part of
line,
what-
it's not going to, this is not even going to require any general fund.
Correct.
Ah,
Well, so let me be clear on that. That's our managing the transition plan over the next 2 to 3 years. To be honest with you, what's going to come back to you at some point that we need to discuss is when there's this 600-page or whatever it is document says there's some elevators we need to put in and new accessible playgrounds and 76 bathrooms across the city and so on and so forth, that will have a price tag. But the reason we want to stretch this out to not do a 6-month transition plan but spend 3 whole years doing it is we want to be sending reports to you, to council, that say this is the price tag on it, so there's something to work on, how we're going to prioritize them and spread them out over years. So you will see those, you'll have real numbers to work with.
so those plans, those numbers will be given to us at the biannual reports, or?
That's our intention.
Great, sounds great. Well, on that note, you might not be able to answer this question right now, but do you, like you said, elevators, and once you get those figures done, but which programs or services or activities are currently the least accessible to persons with disabilities, which will also probably relate to the fact that will have the biggest sticker tag?
I laugh because that's that question that, people in the disability field, have that nightmare fantasy that someone will actually ask them that question publicly. And so I'm going to really demur, I think, on the answer to that, because I think my city attorney would advise me to be careful on that. Look, I think, so I'm going to cheat on the answer, but it's a serious one. I think our biggest issue on accessibility, city employees get it, council gets it, mayor's office gets it. The problem is that people just don't realize what it takes to make things accessible without having sometimes an expert come in and discuss that. We've had examples where folks got fined extra for a parking ticket, but they were literally in the office and needed to pay it. They literally didn't have arms that could grasp and couldn't sign what they needed to sign, and got sort of told, well, too bad, come back and figure it out. Well, no, we have to make that accessible. We have to find some way for them to sign. We have to make our websites accessible. We have been, our sidewalks, our curb ramps, housing, all these things have come up. We prefer that in the future they don't come up as lawsuits. They come up because the city is proactively addressing those issues, identifying them, and making the difference. So that's our goal on this. There's no particular department that stands out as inaccessible. But bottom line is, the larger a department is, the more little details it's got to worry about. And again, some of our biggest departments have been some of our best at moving forward.
Well, I appreciate your work, and I look forward to the upcoming reports and everything else of the status, because this is utmostly important. I'm glad that we are taking the time to really do this for our disabled communities, which often get overlooked, right? It's our parks and libraries that often get overlooked, but then when it comes to disability, it's overlooked in every area. So we hope to strive to create a city that's accessible and equitable for all, whether you're disabled or it's not just based on color, your belief or anything else, but also on disability. So I really appreciate your work, and especially doing it on a shoestring budget amidst all this other things that we're putting on top of you. But I really look forward to the reports, and please let us know about those budget asks, especially early on. I mean, we always meet. So earlier on, we could, especially if it's a general fund budget requirement, we could start talking about it early and put it in. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to hold that on the desk till we have quorum to receive and file, so we'll hold that. And, okay, so we'll hold that. And then item number 2.
Item number 2 is the Los Angeles Bureau of Sanitation report in response to a motion, Rue Buscaino Wesson, relative to instructing the Bureau of Sanitation, with the assistance from the Department of Building and Safety, the Los Angeles Fire Department, City Administrative Officer, and the Los Angeles City Health Commission, to work with the South Coast Air Quality Management District and Los Angeles County Department of Public Health to report back within 30 days with an update on the priority ranking of the potential sites that could have excessive levels of chromium-6 and related matters.
Thank you. And we have the Sanitation Bureau already here at the table. Thank you so much, and thank you for the preview that you guys gave me at my office. So, but if you could present.
Thank you, Councilmember Ryu. My name is Doug Walters. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer with LA Sanitation, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lonnie Ayers, from our Industrial Waste Management Division. We are very pleased to report back on this motion regarding this very serious carcinogen known as hexavalent chromium. In the motion, you would ask that we work with the South Coast Air Quality Management District and the LA County Department of Public Health to report back on the update on the priority ranking of potential sites that could have excess levels of Chrome-6, as well as developing a plan for joint inspections of these sites, conducting an analysis of potential environmental justice impacts on Los Angeles communities, and prepare a written update on ways to reduce the potential health effects of to LA residents. And we've done just that in our report to this committee. The good news is that initially a very broad net was thrown over many of the vendors and businesses here in Los Angeles to look at this issue, not just in the South LA area that borders Paramount, Compton, and North Long Beach. There's about 8 different platers, metal platers, and metal processing facilities that have been tagged by South Coast AQMD for these types of emissions, and the concerns were, was there any fugitive emissions that were coming into the city of Los Angeles. The good news is, in their letter to us just a little over a week ago, is that the harmful elements of these fugitive hexavalent chromium emissions are primarily only within the first 500 feet from where they are emitted from. So there's no severe danger from those specific 8 facilities outside the city of LA in terms of a risk to cancer. Nonetheless, it's still a very serious issue. People in Los Angeles are transient, right, moving around from city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, and they need to be certainly made aware of the potential dangers, as do the emitters themselves, of course, and that's why Lonnie Ayers is here, is going to get into the specifics of our studies and the maps that we have provided to you and to this committee. So of the original large net that was thrown, only 39 of those facilities are actual metal platers. Those are the ones that really get into the nitty-gritty of the ability to emit hexavalent chromium through the plating processes, through heat transfer, the polishing and things of that nature that they're engaged with. So Lonnie's going to address how we're going to inspect those 39 platers and how they've already been tagged to make sure that they are in compliance with all rules. In addition, there's sort of a second tier of 502 metal processors. These are folks that get involved in some welding, some metal forging, some wood preservatives, using pigments and dyes, things of that nature that should also follow best available control technology and best management practices. LA Sanitation does meet with all the different types of industries in Los Angeles to provide business assistance to them, to help them better understand what new technologies are out there to reduce not only air emissions, but certainly any wet emissions that are discharges to the sewer that would have impact on our wastewater treatment operations and or our biosolids that we beneficially reuse. So as mentioned, hexchrome is a known carcinogen. And it primarily can potentially develop into lung and nasal cancer. And there are some non-cancer chronic health risks as well that can occur from hexchrome, and those are asthma, nasal ulcerations, and dermatitis. And so I'm going to pass it over to Lonnie, who's going to talk about the specific rules that are both in existence with AQMD and the work on proposed rules and how we want to work together with them to come and better prevent.
Yeah, before you go there, you
Yes.
talked about the potential health risks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you repeat them? And what were they again? If you could.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
just for the members of the public who are listening in, they would know what hexavalent chromium we're talking about, or otherwise more famously known as chromium 6, right?
Correct.
And this is where the movie with Julia Roberts, right?
Aaron Brockovich, I think, is the
Aaron
person you're referring
Brockovich,
to.
right? Aaron Brockovich, where there was a huge incident up north. So.
Right. So, and sanitation, it tends to be more focused on the water emissions, and this motion in particular relates to the air emissions. Just for the record, LA Sanitation is not the agency who monitors air emissions. It's South Coast AQMD, but certainly we can be more well aware of each other. We certainly have the ability to inform them of any findings that we have, which Lonnie will describe. But to answer your question, certainly hexchrome is the potential on the cancer side is specific to lung and nasal cancer. So that's breathing it in from these emissions that may escape the facilities that produce them. And then the non-cancer chronic health risks that can occur, and these are listed in the report, are asthma, nasal ulcerations, and dermatitis.
Are there any immediate short-term health concerns, or is it more long-term
Not
exposure?
that I'm aware, not that we've mentioned in our report, but we certainly are working with LA County Department of Health. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here today, nor could AQMD, but we can certainly ask that of them. We'll make a note of that. So we'll go ahead and pass it over to Lonnie Ayers with our Industrial Waste Management Division.
Regarding the air rules, regulations, South Coast Air Quality Management District is proposing specific rules as we're speaking today, develop and to strengthen to reduce chromium fugitive air emissions. And that deals with new and existing sources. So whenever a facility undergoes a modification, they have to submit applications, and then they go under preview for whether or not they're in compliance with health risk standards. All new modified sources that are being reviewed under toxics, air toxics, there's health risk thresholds, there's specific rules where individual facilities must meet with respect to their particular equipment they have in place. They could have in place certain equipment where They have best air toxic control equipment and also have to meet specific standards, best management practices, housekeeping requirements. So they definitely have a very good program, and there's an upcoming rule that's going to be amended for metal platers, finishers, anodizing facilities to where they will have to incorporate certain practices, for instance, have in place air negative emissions, covers over plating tanks, enclosures, and et cetera. So that deals with specific rules, and that LA Sanitation Regulatory Affairs Division will be participating on getting involved in the working group to ensure that we are involved and have a say in the rulemaking process, and also in the prioritization and ranking of facilities that emit chromium emission fugitives.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but let the record reflect that Council President Wesson joined us earlier. Yes. Oh, and also, and I know Councilman Wesson is very been a champion on these issues, and is a seconder of this motion because not just oil, but when it comes to chromium-6, it disproportionately affects communities of color. Thank you for that presentation. You know, can you, especially for the members of the public, can you describe what kind of sites would have the excessive ambient air levels of chromium-6?
Yes, of the 21,000 facilities that were forwarded South Coast, 39 have excessive potential for emitting fugitive emissions of chromium, and that would be metal finishers and anodizing plating facilities.
So what's like a metal finisher? Is it just, it's like an industrial, they make fences? I mean, what kind of products come out of it?
And typically in metal finishing, we have, you can have plumbing fixtures, decorative coating, construction materials such as screws, bolts. There's also mag wheels, for instance, cars. Heavy machinery equipment needs to be coated with chromium for abrasive reasons. Those are typical examples of the types of products that are being produced when chrome is actually plated on what we call the basis material.
Great. So there's about 39
in the
that you
city of Los
identified,
Angeles.
and over 500 of metal processing facilities.
That's correct. That yet needs to be looked into, and that's why LA Sanitation is recommending that environmental compliance inspectors conduct what are known as canvassing activities to determine whether or not there are wastewater generating processes being performed on site. Though they may be dry operations such as grinding, welding, heat treating, that will give us an idea of whether or not that facility actually emits fumes, mist, or gases.
Great. And, you know, I really appreciate your thorough report. But, you know, what was more impressive is, can you let us know about, you said that to inspect all the 39 facilities and the 500-plus platers, that you guys would be able to do it within how many months?
A 6-month period or less.
Very impressive. Really appreciate that. And I'm sure after the end of 6 months, you'll give us a report?
Yes, that is
to
correct.
the City Council?
Yes.
Right. And that's listed in the recommendation. So just for the public's benefit, the first one is to direct sanitation and the Industrial Waste Management Division to use the established methodology in determining the priority ranking. So initially that first glance was the mile, looking at the mile away from parks, from schools, see if there's any clusters in the EJ communities, the 3 EJ communities, environmental justice communities here in Los Angeles. We've also met with representatives from those 3 communities as well, so they're very well aware of this issue. The second one, of course, is what we just said, is to perform the canvassing activities, which we're pledging to do within 6 months of both the 39 and the 502 metal processing. And the third one, as I alluded to earlier, is to hold an LA industry business symposium for the metal finishers, electroplaters, and other metal processing to convey all those best available and best management practices to them.
Thank you. And actually, I have 3 additional recommendations I wanted to add to that. But, Mr. Weston, do you have any questions? Okay, great. So I'd like to add direct LA Sanitation Regulatory Affairs Division to participate in the development of the Southern California AQMD proposed changes to Rule 1469, which is the hexavalent chromium emissions from chrome plating and chromic acid anodizing operations. Regarding hexavalent chromium fugitive emissions practices and requirements to eliminate the human health risk and exposures. We talked about that. And then secondarily, I wanted to direct LA Sanitation Regulatory Affairs Division to request participation as a member of the AQMD Working Committee charged with implementing the Air Toxics Action Plan. And lastly, direct sanitation to work with the LA County Department of Public Health to identify and study residential communities, schools, and parks within 1,000 feet of identified metal plating facilities to determine if any have experienced a higher than average occurrence of lung cancer or any of the other ailments that you listed.
Got those. Thank you.
Great. And seeing there is no public comment on this item, I'd like to approve the recommendations in this report with the additional 3 recommendations previously mentioned. Thank you, Mr. President. So moved. Thank you. And Mr. Clerk, if we could go back to item number 1 for approval, now that we have quorum. Do we need to read that in, or can I just approve it?
Just approve it.
Just approve it? Okay. So we approve item number 1. No objections? No objections. Thank you. Now, item number 3. This is a super exciting one, and this is something that I wish we could move faster on. If we could have Mr. CLA read in item number 3.
Sure. Department of Recreation and Parks report relative to the feasibility of setting aside future parcel tax funding to support a citywide joint use agreement with the Los Angeles Unified School District for open recreational space.
Great. And Mr. Weston, this is the Recreation and Parks report regarding Measure A funds, where and I know you get this all the time in your district too, and I get it all the time from the community about people coming up and saying, Councilmember, I got a great idea. And I'm like, what's that? And they said, I know we have a lack of green space. Why don't we open up the school? So this is a situation that we've been trying to tackle for numerous years, if not decades. And I know, based on your report, we have numerous joint use agreements already. But I'd love for you to give us an update with the full evaluation of Measure A as well.
Sure, absolutely. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Matt Rudnick, Chief Management Analyst with the Department of Recreation and Parks. I'm joined by Bill Jones, he's our Grants Director, and Joel Alvarez, who's our Partnership Lead and works directly with LAUSD, overseeing our existing joint use agreements. As you mentioned, our report in front of you is in response to a motion you introduced that asked us to look at ways Measure A, which actually hadn't been approved and was approved after the motion was introduced, look at ways Measure A funds, which is a recently approved parcel tax, county parcel tax, can be used to support basically capital improvements at school sites that can be used as park amenities for the public, not just for students at those schools. So I'll go through the report and provide an overview, and then we'd be happy to take any questions. The first part of the report gives it kind of an overview of Measure A as we know it. The county, with their working group, is still developing grant guidelines for the parcel tax. So Measure A, which is known as the Safe, Clean Neighborhood, Parks, and Beaches Protection Measure of 2016, was passed by voters in November by a margin of 75%. Measure A establishes a special parcel tax of 1.5 cents per square foot of structural improvements, which is intended to support park projects, renovation projects, and the acquisition of new projects, as well as some other kind of park programming and other elements. In the report, talks about the 6 different program categories that will be funded as part of Measure A. The first 2 are awarded on a per capita basis, and those dollars that are awarded on an annual basis through the parcel tax will come directly to the Department of Rec and Parks. We anticipate that we'll receive roughly $19 million per year in categories 1 and 2 of the parcel tax. Categories 3, 4, and 5 will all be awarded to park agencies and CBOs in some cases on a competitive basis. So we'll competitively apply for those grant funds. As it relates to joint use, we think that both categories 1 and 2 could support joint use projects, and in the competitive categories, likely category 3 could support joint use projects. Just an update on the working group. Basically, funding associated with categories 1 and 2 is anticipated to become available in 2019. Again, grant guidelines are still being developed, and we actually sit on a working group with the county that helps craft and provide input on those guidelines. And then after categories 1 and 2 are essentially funded and funding is available, categories 3, 4, and 5 would follow the competitive grant categories. The next part of the report talks about our existing relationship with LAUSD and the number of joint use agreements we do have. Currently, we have a longstanding relationship with the district. It's not necessarily at scale with the city. We have about 30 joint use agreements currently active. 6 of them are for pools, for aquatics facilities, and those tend to be the best kind of reciprocal arrangements. LAUSD uses our lifeguards, oftentimes for their students during school hours, and then during the summer and other times we use their pools for public use. The other agreements, the majority of the agreements that we currently have are the result of Prop K funding, where the school district actually applied for our Prop K funds, and as part of that, they were required to enter into a joint use relationship with Rec and Parks to ensure that there's adequate public access to those amenities that are funded through Prop K. Just in general, of the 30 agreements, some of the challenges with joint use we have with the district just include the design of the school. Some campuses don't lend themselves to opening up to the public during non-school hours. Bathroom access can be a challenge. One of the other more recent requirements LAUSD has given us is that we actually have to staff the school during public access to a joint use facility. Sometimes that can be cost prohibitive. And then the other real element is coordinating shared use. If you have a very active high school that has a lot of sports programs, sometimes it's challenging just to balance the use of the field space for the school versus the use of the field space for kind of public drop-in access. Then really the next part of the report is in direct response to the motion and your question, Councilman Rue, which is how can Measure A be used to support capital improvement at joint use sites? Based on the information that's been provided to us by the county, again, Measure A can be used to support joint use capital projects. In categories 1 and 2 of the funding, the city would need to serve as the grantee of funding, and we would enter into a joint use relationship as well as probably sign a development agreement with LAUSD to construct, let's say, a field or a playground, and then have our joint use agreement cover the hours of operation for public use. In addition, in the competitive categories of funding, the district can actually apply directly for funding, and they may do that, and they would just need to demonstrate that they're providing adequate public access to those amenities. So that's just the overview of the report. We have a few recommendations that we developed with your staff and with the CAO. The first is to come back and report, just to help advance this work, is to come back and provide a cost and public use analysis, basically comparing the development and costs associated with the development of a new park and the programming there versus the cost associated with a joint use agreement and the building of an amenity there, and to compare the kinds of use we would get for both so we can make an informed decision about whether or not basically a joint use agreement at a particular area of the city is a good investment. The second recommendation is to develop and come back with some mechanisms to streamline and simplify the process of entering into joint use agreements with LAUSD. Right now, we do it on a kind of case-by-case basis. In the past, we've talked about a larger master joint use agreement or some kind of joint powers agreement, and that's something we want to help advance and move forward. So those are the recommendations. Again, happy to take any questions about the topic.
Great. Thank you so much for your thorough report, and I am very excited about this, and I'm excited about moving this forward. But can you please provide a description of a typical joint use agreement and why it's been so hard in the past to implement?
Yeah, so it's a standard contract, almost like a lease. And Joel Alvarez can jump in as he is intimately involved with our specific joint use agreements. But basically, it sets out the roles and responsibilities both for LAUSD and the city. It lays out the time that the public has access to a particular facility. It talks about our responsibilities related to staffing the site as well as custodial. We actually pay the district to have their custodians service, let's say, restrooms that are in use during the time that the public has access. And really the joint use agreement then would be specific to whatever amenity like a field or a playground or in some cases a gymnasium, and specific to the uses for the public that covers. So it's a standard document. One of the other challenges or hurdles we've needed to work through the city attorney and LAUSD's general counsel is how we share risk associated with the public use of a school site when school isn't in session. So indemnification provisions and liability provisions can be challenged, and sometimes they change case by case. And so trying to standardize that language is also something we should strive for.
Great. So what's the difficulty?
So I think it's not necessarily entering into the agreement sometimes, it's the actual in practice operation of an agreement. We may have buy-in to enter into an agreement for a particular site, but let's say we have turnover of a principal, and that principal is more interested in making sure that that facility is used for their students versus open to the public. So sometimes that can be challenging. If we have a very enthusiastic principal, there's less of a challenge. But again, it is a contract, and one other challenge that's come into play is the usable life of whatever amenity that might be built. So if we have a joint use agreement for 30 years, but we fund a field to be built at a school, and that field essentially is past its usable life in 8 years, the joint use agreement at that point becomes difficult to continue unless funding can be identified to then rebuild that field. So there's different circumstances, but I think that our management, Mike Scholl, our general manager, has actually made it a goal for us to expand joint use throughout the city, specifically in areas of the city that are dense and lack park access, where we have just a deficiency of parks. It's a really good tool to use where in places that are dense and the cost of land is sometimes prohibitive in terms of the development of a new park.
Okay. Well, so what would be the quickest way to dramatically expand parks and playgrounds through a joint use process, and what are the obstacles?
Sure. So I talked a little bit about the obstacles. I think the opportunity is elementary schools. I think that one of the things we've noticed is high schools with the fields, it can be just challenging balancing use, but we see a very underutilization of the play spaces at elementary schools. We also think greening those elementary schools, planting trees, providing kind of just other multi-benefits at those school sites is a real opportunity. So I think as part of this effort and your motion, we're looking at putting together a group to really advance how many elementary schools we can open up. It'll really be a function, I think, of funding staff members that would be there on the weekends or after school or on holidays. That might cap our expansion kind of appetite, but I think elementary schools is the big opportunity, and that's where we want to put our effort.
Right, and they're more plentiful, and they're more scattered throughout. Smaller, but still have the space. Obviously we all know what the pros are. If there's any additional pros about positives about implementing a joint use agreement, please feel free to say so. But are there any negatives, any cons for doing a joint use?
You know, I think for us, I think we just have to balance investments made to our own park system and our own property with investments we make on other property. And I think this motion helps us, and what we're being asked to report back on is help us make informed decisions about the best use of public dollars when we're building new parks or park amenities. So I think it's really making an informed decision on does it make sense to build a playground where the majority of the use might be for students, and then on the weekends the use will be for the surrounding community, and is that investment a higher priority than, let's say, trying to purchase some property, you know, in an adjacent area and convert it into a park that would, you know, in perpetuity be a park. So I think those are some of the things we need to balance, but certainly other cities, other big cities have much more robust joint use programs. It's a best practice among park agencies and just for park access. So I think we want to learn from what other cities have done and the successful programs that exist and then move forward.
Great. Well, I think the Councilman Weston doesn't have any questions, so, yeah, no, he's there, yeah. I know, but he has no questions, so I'm gonna, before I move to public comment, I want to propose one additional recommendation for the report. I want to instruct RAP with the assistance of the City Administrative Officer to establish a working group, including relevant city departments, nonprofit partners, and joint use advocates to streamline the joint use agreement process and request that the participation of the Los Angeles Unified School District, the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, and the Los Angeles Mayor's Office.
You got it.
Great. Before we approve, we have one speaker, and thank you so much for the presentation, and I'm very excited about this.
Thank you, Councilman.
Ida? Do you want to come on up?
Thank you very much. This is one of the most exciting possibilities for all communities. And I think even in communities that are park-rich, this makes the health, it assists the health of the communities.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that we need to open up the dialogue throughout the community so that the use of the space and the care is a huge community effort and a cooperative effort between agencies and community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ida. Everyone agrees with you. I know all my colleagues, everybody on the City Council has been waiting for this one because this would dramatically able to increase green space and access for everyone throughout the city. So I'm very excited about this. And Mr. President, no other comments. I'd like to approve this recommendation and with the additional recommendation that we just mentioned. So no other public comment. I'd like to approve and thank you.
You're welcome.
And meeting is adjourned.